is backing the government's move to terminate negotiations with China on oil and gas explorations in the West Philippine Sea.
China said, we will not agree to enter into the third agreement unless you change that provision. Delete the provision which says the oil and gas belongs to the Philippines. Delete also the provision that Philippine law will govern.
Moving forward, Carpio encouraged the incoming administration to submit to the arbitration. It means that ASEAN countries like the Philippines must identify the boundaries of their own territories.
Chinese just scared us because Duterte allowed himself to be bullied by China.
The Duterte administration has terminated all talks with China for joint exploration activities in the West Philippine Sea. It all came down to sovereignty and constitutionality, according to Foreign Affairs Chief Teddy Boy Locsin. Now that the deal is off the table, what happens to relations between China and the Philippines in and outside of disputed waters? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this edition of The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay, and joining us is a security analyst and DLSU International Studies Professor Renato de Castro. Professor de Castro, welcome po to The Chiefs.
Good evening. Hello. Nice to see you again.
Opo. Good to see you, sir. Sir, tell us about this this development. What do you think? But I also want to emphasize, this is the position of the outgoing administration. First of all, that decision on its own, what might it mean? But also, does this mean anything for the next administration?
Well, for one thing, it's an indication of the failure of this administration in terms of applying what I called an appeasement policy. That we basically try to address this issue relying on China's preferred approach in managing this issue. What are these approaches? Number one, of course, we deal with China on a bilateral level, and it's primarily on a matter of consultation. Then we try to encourage greater economic cooperation with China, the expectation that closer economic relation with China would manage this dispute. And of course, the key element regarding this is, of course, China's offer of a joint development, which are there on the table since the time of course, Secretary General Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s. This was, of course, the solution that China has been peddling to the other claimant states since the 1980s.
Okay, you mentioned two things there, two approaches there. One is appeasement, the other one is bilateral. So if not those,
Yes.
if that's the right, what is the alternative to that?
Well, the alternative, of course, is the reliance on the arbitral ruling, which, of course, would entail basically telling China that we don't recognize your expansive claim in the South China Sea. But, of course, we encounter another impasse, and that China...
Professor, are you still with us? We seem to be having difficulties. We'll try to get Professor de Castro back online. We'll take a quick technical break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs. We continue our conversation with security analyst and DLSU International Studies Professor Renato de Castro. Kasama na rin po natin si Ami Pamintuan, joining us from the Philippine Star Office in Manila. Professor de Castro, let's pick up where we left off. Kanina nga po sinasabi nyo, no, this decision by the Duterte administration to cut off the negotiations with China. You said, mali yung approach dati ng appeasement and bilateral approach. You were starting to say we should have invoked the arbitral ruling from the very start. And what? I presume multilateral approach as opposed to bilateral. What else were you proposing?
Well, it's not a matter of being wrong, no? But this is, the realpolitik of the game. We have to understand we're dealing with an emerging power that's, of course, effective expansion in the South China Sea. So that's the reality we face. We're facing a very confident power that has declared China Sea as one of its core interests.
Okay, Professor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Did I come back?
Ito na po kayo.
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Sige
So
po.
it is not simply a matter of legality or diplomacy. It's a classic example of realpolitik. China is using its comprehensive capabilities to really push us to the corner, to simply accept China's formula. No, this is of course the formula of when we talk about joint development for the Chinese, and this is something that is also very much unacceptable to the Philippines. The first condition of the Chinese, when we will enter into a joint development under the Chinese term, is that we have to China's undisputable claim in the South China Sea. Then that's the time that China would start the negotiation. That's the time probably we could get concessions from China. But of course, this would entail accepting China's claim and the South China Sea, which of course effectively would negate our victory in the arbitral ruling.
Sige pa, malinaw po yun. Yun din po ang sinabi kanina ni DFA Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin. It comes down to sovereignty and the very first premise of who owns the resources there. But before we bring in Ami, just the second part of my original question, and before we get deeper into strategy, this position stated by DFA Secretary Locsin and by the Duterte administration, does it speak necessarily for the incoming administration of incoming President Bongbong Marcos?
Well, with the case of the incoming president, Bongbong Marcos, unlike the current administration, he already declared that he would abide by the arbitral ruling. So again, this is already indicating that we might expect a more, I would use the term, more nationalistic and possibly more assertive position in contrast to the outgoing administration, who immediately at the onset of his term already indicated that it would appease China. Now, I heard from the incoming National Security Advisor that the policy vis-a-vis China would be based on critical engagement. Let's see how this critical engagement will unfold under this incoming administration. Primarily because it already indicated, that any negotiations with China would have to be based on the arbitral ruling, which is actually a legal negation of China's 9-line claim.
Professor, speaking of the outgoing administration, of course, it continues to defend President Duterte's stance toward China, Pero you think this latest move of the DFA, you think it's an acknowledgement that appeasement didn't work?
Yes, it is. It is I would call the smoking gun evidence of the failure of this administration to implement, initially, of course, and that's just my argument, a all-out appeasement policy.
But on the other hand, of course, the economic managers also say that it worked in terms of the economy, that we were able to work with the second largest economy in the world. Do you think that's a valid argument? Because some critics are saying we didn't get enough. We didn't get enough of the investments, and the projects actually didn't materialize.
Yes. China's supposed to finance the Build program of this administration. Please remember, when President Duterte was in Beijing, and of course, the first time he met President Jinping, when he arrived, $24 billion. So where's the beef, as the saying goes? We only have two major investment projects, the Kaliwa Dam, and of course the Chico River Irrigation Project. And the third one supposed to be, that was signed, I think only 2 or 3 days ago, was the bridge connecting Davao and Samal Island. But that remains to be seen whether that will be implemented or not.
Okay, but
So again, this is efforts, of course, of this outgoing administration to at least salvage what is available. At least in terms of supposed to be the economic benefits we got from this appeasement policy, which is actually very meager.
yes, but we're talking about approach, di ba? Parang not appeasement, something a bit more assertive, not bilateral, and maybe a multilateral approach based on the arbitral ruling. But all of that speaks to approach. In the meantime, there is China taking its position. Is China's hardline stance based on our approach, or is that basically their position already? In other words, will changing the approach change anything? Is China, in fact, open to a different approach to which it will be more
since
compelled?
2010, yeah, since
I'm sorry?
Oh, well, that has been China's approach since, of course, in March 2010, when even before President Xi Jinping came into power, the South China Sea issue is one of the 3 core interests of China. What are the 3 core interests? Taiwan, Tibet, and the South China Sea. What do we mean by core interests? It means that China would do everything that's possible, including the use of the military capability, to protect those interests. And of course, later, this was also again reiterated by President Xi Jinping around 2014, when he announced China's foreign policy is geared towards protecting its core interests. So again, reiterating what has been announced since March 2010. So this is a part of what we call
Wala. Professor? Are you still there?
Professor?
Wala.
Nawala.
Nahihirapan talaga tayo kanina
grand strategy of reviving. I'm here, but I think
Pakiulit na lang, sir, kasi nawala kayo. Nag-lock. Ng konti. Yung bandang dulo lang.
You were talking about, particularly, you're saying that the South China Sea being one of the 3 core interests of
Yes.
China.
core interests, yes. So this was announced in March 2010, even before President Xi Jinping. What are the 3 core interests? Taiwan, Tibet, and the South China Sea. What's the context of the core interest? It means China would use its comprehensive power, including the military capabilities, to enhance and protect those interests.
Yes, but within...
And of course, later, a few years after President Xi Jinping became, of course, the party secretary general and the president of the People's Republic of China, he reiterated this, protecting China's core interests, while at the same time also supposed to be pacifying its peripheral areas, meaning Southeast Asia, pacifying us like we're barbarians, but at the same time willing to use China's comprehensive power to put us on our place.
Okay.
And of course, this was captured in July, in 2010, when the Chinese foreign counselor warned the ASEAN countries, China is big, you are small. So this is the reality that we will have to face.
Yes.
As, of course, China becomes more emergent and more assertive in the South China
Yes,
Sea.
but in the meantime, in the face of that power, as you've also said, ang isang pinangahawakan natin is the arbitral ruling. Within the context of that core interest, specifically for the South China Sea, my question is there wiggle room for China to to talk about joint exploration. Now bringing in explicitly the arbitral ruling on the side of the Philippines, the core interest on the side of China, what does it all mean for options for joint exploration? Is there still...
I don't think that will be possible. I don't think that will be possible. The only possibility I see is a unilateral effort on our part, which incidentally was adopted by Indonesia. Despite the warning by China not to pursue its exploration on its waters of north of the Natuna Islands, Indonesia did proceed to conduct exploration. I guess the Indonesians have more guts, and of course are risk takers compared to our government, which is practically very risk averse. So it would take political courage, plus more importantly, it would take, remember also on the same, was it on the same day or a day before that, National Security Advisor Emilio Esperon mentioned this: diplomatic protest might not be.
Wala talaga.
What does he base our claim? Back the arbitral ruling with military power, specifically naval power. But of course, we cannot develop that capability. What we can do at this time is simply to show China that we have the courage, we have determination to assert our claim.
Okay. Professor Renato de Castro of De La Salle University. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Professor.
We will take another break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs. We now have former Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice Carpio, welcome po to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Justice.
Good evening, Ami. Good evening, Ed. Thank you for inviting me.
Justice Carpio, Roby Alampay here po. Kasama rin po natin si
Roby,
Ed
yes.
Lingao, as you mentioned, at kasama na rin natin si Ami Pamintuan. Now, let's go straight to this matter. You and outgoing Foreign Affairs Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin see eye to eye now on this decision to cancel negotiations for joint exploration with China in the West Philippine Sea. Take us back lang to the basic points and principles on why this deal doesn't make sense and why we can do without it and should do without it.
Well, if you recall, Robbie, we signed a memorandum of understanding with China for both countries to jointly explore for oil and gas in the West Philippine Sea. That memorandum of understanding stated that the framework of the cooperation shall be the service contract system of the Philippines. Very important. Under the service contract system of the Philippines. Now, under the service contract system of the Philippines, every service contract states in the first whereas clause, whereas the oil and gas belong to the Philippines. There's also a provision that Philippine law will govern the contract. Those are the two provisions that are very important in the service contract because they establish that we follow the Constitution, we follow the arbitral award. Now, so that was signed, we're happy. I think we won in that round. The second round was the terms of reference. The terms of reference was signed and it implemented the MOU. So again, in that round we won because there was an implied admission by China that the oil and gas in the West Philippine Sea belong to the Philippines. In the third round, because there was to be a final contract between CNOOC, China National Offshore Company, and Forum Energy, the holder of the service contract in Reed Bank, Service Contract 72. That was supposed to be a commercial agreement to finalize everything, to complete the entire agreement. So, however, before the third agreement could be signed, China demanded that we delete the first whereas clause in the service contract, which says Philippines own the oil and gas. They wanted that deleted. They also wanted deleted the provision that Philippine law will govern the contract. In other words, China will reverse everything and will force us to abandon the arbitral award and force us to violate our own constitution. That's why Secretary Locsin decided we cannot do that.
Okay.
And unfortunately, 4 months ago, President Duterte said, because Forum Energy was about to send their survey ship to Reed Bank because the moratorium was lifted, Forum Energy contracted, paid the owners of the ship, but Duterte suddenly said, stop, do not go to Reed Bank because we have to honor our agreement with China. That was wrong. We never had a complete agreement with China because the third agreement was never signed. And this statement of Secretary Locsin puts everything in perspective, that we were not able to sign the third agreement, and therefore those agreements are now terminated.
Okay.
We're back to square one, and the next administration will have a free hand in charting its own path. They
Okay.
will not be bound by any agreement. In other words, that statement of Secretary Locsin corrected the earlier statement of President Duterte that we already have an agreement. We don't have an agreement yet. So that is where we are now. That's why I support the statement of Secretary Locsin, because it clarifies everything, that China did not agree to the framework of this MOU. They wanted it changed. Of course, we cannot agree to that. So who won or who lost? Well, at least we have an implied admission by China in the MOU and TOR that the oil and gas belong to us.
Sige pa.
And
But, I mean,
that's where we are.
Apa. I mean, to that question of that's where we are, and we are in transition between two administrations right now. As you said, it clean to align now the policy for the next administration. Tama po ba yun? So we still, this does not necessarily speak for the next administration.
Secretary Locsin is not laying down any policy for the next administration. He's just saying the slate is wiped clean. You can start on your own.
Sir, I suppose what surprises a lot of people is China's apparent failure to recognize the implied recognition of Philippine ownership over oil and gas and the implementation of Philippine laws in the first two attempts at reaching this final agreement. Is it possible that they really failed to see that, or was there something else here?
Well, I think it was implied, of course, in the MOU, and I think they knew that, and they were probably thinking that this could be the template for a South China Sea-wide settlement of the South China Sea dispute, because Vietnam was watching closely the developments in the MOU and TOR, and they said, we are willing to sign an agreement like that. Malaysia and Indonesia said, yes, we are willing to sign, because China would be recognizing the sovereign rights in our exclusive economic zone. And, instead of getting a Western company to do the drilling, we'd rather
Sinop.
get Sinop, because Sinop brings a new element to the table. They would bring peace and stability, because China would be now recognizing our sovereign right. That's why that was our priority, to get Sinop in for China to get a piece of the pie so that they will accept our sovereign rights. But at the last minute, China changed its position, and I don't know why. Maybe they think they're strong enough to bully us.
Yeah.
Well, what happened? Last year, Malaysia needed to develop a new oil and gas field in their exclusive economic zone, because their oil reserves and gas reserves are being depleted. So they sent a survey ship to drill in their exclusive economic zone. China said, do not drill, that's within the 9-dash line. China sent its Coast Guard. But Malaysia sent its Navy and Coast Guard to protect its drilling ships. And the U.S. lent support by sailed by with their warship. And Malaysia was able to complete their drilling despite the threat of China.
Yeah.
The same thing happened in the North Natuna. Indonesia surveyed North Natuna, and China said, do not survey because that's part of the 9-dash line. China sent its Coast Guard. The Indonesians sent its Navy and Coast Guard to protect their survey ship. They completed. In our case, we have already an arbitral award. We have a mutual defense treaty with China, and China just sneezed and said to President Duterte, don't go there. And President Duterte told the Foreign Energy, stop, don't proceed, because that will anger China. So that's where we are. We lack political will. The Malaysians and Indonesians proceeded despite the threats of China, despite the Coast Guard vessels of China in the area. We could do the same. And we have the added support of the U.S. warships there. So we have a big problem now, because we are running out of gas in Malampaya. Malampaya supplies 40% of the energy requirement of Luzon. Without Malampaya, we'll have 12 to 14 hours of daily brownout in Luzon. That will be worse than the pandemic, because at least in the pandemic we have power, we can work from home, we can have Zoom. But if you don't have power, everything will close down. Factories, schools, businesses, and your house will have no power. You cannot Zoom. So
Well, we have a new administration coming in, and you think the political will be there, because he has said that he is going to pursue a critical engagement with China. Can you guess what that might entail? What critical engagement might?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised that the President-elect said that we will assert the arbitral award. We will not give up an inch, a single millimeter of our sovereign rights, our sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea. That's music to my ears. But we have to watch the President-elect if he will walk the talk. I mean, it will be what he will actually do on the ground, on the water.
Yeah.
So that's a good initial step that sets the tone, and we're happy with that. And he will have to decide to follow the example of Malaysia or Indonesia, so we can have, because the only replacement for Malampaya right now is Reed Bank. Without Reed Bank, we will have to import LNG. And LNG will increase our power rate so much. The consumers will suffer. We already have one of the highest power rates in Asia. And if we use LNG, the power rates will go up even higher, and investors will not come here anymore.
Yeah, you
So
mentioned...
we have to make a decision. Do we send our survey ships there to start the drilling and follow Malaysia and Indonesia, or do we just fold up?
Yeah. Is that also to say, sir, that the problem is not in our position but in our approach? In other words, I mean, that was brought up, that appeasement obviously failed. Simply being more assertive and following, as you said, the example of Indonesia and Malaysia might make a difference even if we were not to change any of our positions.
Yes, we should follow the example of Malaysia and Indonesia. In fact, we are in a better position. We have the arbitral award. They don't have an arbitral award. We have a mutual defense treaty with the U.S., and the U.S. said the West Philippine Sea is included in the treaty theater. In other words, if an armed attack is made on our ship by China in the West Philippine Sea, that will trigger the operation of the mutual defense treaty. So that is why China doesn't attack our BRP Sierra Madre. It's dilapidated. It's manned by about 10 soldiers, but they cannot attack it, because once they attack it, then we can invoke the treaty. So they're just waiting for the ship to collapse on its own because it's rusting already.
Just as you mentioned previously that the MOU looked like a win-win situation for the two countries, what do you think will be the impact on China of this announcement from the Philippines? Because you know what's happening now in Malaysia, in Indonesia, I think China is also considering its influence within the region. You know, you cannot keep using force. I mean, will it help persuade them to, will China change its mind? For example, you know, we are talking about the Chinese, they need a face-saving way out. You don't want to rub anything in. What will be the impact of this Philippine move on Beijing? Just a guess.
The MOU was supposed to be a face-saving exit for China, because they would be given preference in developing the area. They will have a piece of every action in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, because we will give them preference. Of course, they will not be the sole contractor, but they will be given preference. In fact, the crown jewel of our reserves is Reed Bank, and they will be given preference there. But China became too greedy. I mean, they want everything. But the ASEAN states will never give up their sovereign rights there. I mean, it will be suicide for any government to give up its sovereign rights. So China had a chance to find a durable and peaceful and fair settlement, but it backed out at the last minute. I don't know why. But I think they're wrong, because what Indonesia did, what Malaysia did, just is what exactly the other countries will be doing.
Okay, sir. Well, sir, moving forward, the next administration, what should they keep in mind if they ever come to a point where they can sign another MOU? What should they include or not include in the MOU?
Well, the same thing. We should say that the oil and gas belongs to the Philippines. And second, Philippine law will govern. Those are the two important things, because we cannot do away with that, because the Constitution says we have to protect our marine wealth in our exclusive economic zone and reserve its exclusive use and enjoyment to Filipinos.
Anything short of that would...
which affirmed our rights there.
Justice, anything short of that, you would say, would be an indicator of, as you said, not walking the talk?
Yes, I mean, if they agree to give up the arbitral award, or to recognize China's rights, sovereign rights there, that will be against the Constitution. That will be unconstitutional. And I don't think the Filipino people will accept that. And we will be the laughingstock in ASEAN. We have a mutual defense treaty with the strongest power in the world. We have the arbitral award, yet we gave up all these things.
Yes, sir. But sir, if we sign the same kind of MOU, what would stop Sinok from doing the same thing all over again?
What do you mean sign the...
If we sign the same kind of MOU as we did the last time, where China implies its recognition of our ownership of the oil and gas rights and the Philippine law being implemented there, what would stop Sinok from later on, like before, again saying, no, we don't agree to this?
Well, nothing will stop them because they can always walk away. In fact, when we signed this MOU, I said not everything is set in stone because at the last minute, China can always walk away. And they did walk away. But of course, we have to do this because we have to explore all possibilities of an amicable settlement within the Constitution and within the arbitral award. That is our duty. The DFA, as diplomats, must find and negotiate as an agreement that's in conformity with our Constitution. And that's what they did. But unfortunately, China walked away from it.
Justice Carpio, go ahead, Ami. Sorry.
No, I want to move to another topic because you are one of the challengers to the Anti-Terrorism Act. And of course, you are aware of the blocking of 27 websites by the NTC upon request of the National Security Council. Could you give us your thoughts on this and what might be the options for those websites?
Well, those websites have not been designated by the Anti-Terrorism Council as terrorist groups. They have not been designated. The Anti-Terrorism Council designated the CPP, the Communist Party of the Philippines, the NDF, and the Central Committee of the CPP, but not these groups. And under the Anti-Terrorism Act, the only consequence of being designated as a terrorist group, designated, that's different from proscription. The only consequence of being designated is that the AMLC, the Anti-Money Laundering Council, can freeze the assets of these entities that are designated as terrorist. That's all. They cannot shut down the website because that will be in violation of freedom of expression, and only the court can order the shutting down of a website because that is a freedom guaranteed by the Constitution. It cannot be abridged without due process. And due process means there must be a case filed in court before an impartial tribunal, and you are represented by counsel, and you can present your evidence. And that never happened. They were just shut down. So
But
that's clearly a violation of freedom of expression.
Yes, sir. But sir, the NTC in its website claims that it has exclusive jurisdiction over all telecommunications matters. I don't know how far that goes, but that's what
NTC
it
has no
says.
power to shut down any website. They have to get a court order, especially when the website is a news platform, because that is an exercise of freedom of expression. They cannot just close down. They have to, it's like a newspaper, on printed newspaper. The equivalent of a printed newspaper is an online newspaper. Like your show, it cannot just be closed down by the NTC. They have to get a court order. There have to be a basis.
Pero sir,
And
wala ho bang
more
paghihimay
given an
doon?
opportunity to be heard.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Pero sir, legally ba wala ho bang paghihimay doon na NTC can order, for example, the ISPs, as it did, it merely ordered the ISPs to block these websites. Again, we're not lawyers, so what we're trying to figure out here is hanggang saan ang jurisdiction ng NTC when it comes to making these
The
things.
National Security Council has no power to order the shutting down of any website.
Yeah.
Especially websites that are engaged in news dissemination. That's freedom of expression,
But-
freedom of the press.
Idagdag ko lang po doon sa the entire ecosystem for how people get to express, particularly in the public sphere and in these platforms. We're talking about the responsibility and rights and mandate of the NTC. We're talking about the power of the Anti-Terror Council and the National Security Council. What about the platforms? What about the private sector that owns these platforms and operate these platforms? What are their rights and their responsibilities when there is a simple request to block websites?
they have a right to operate, and unless they're shut down by a court order.
No, not the
Nobody can
website,
tell
sir.
them to
Not
close
the
their
websites.
website.
Not the website owners. The platforms on which the ISPs, for example, if I own a platform, I am not the owner of the content or the website. I'm just hosting. The hosts of these websites, what are their rights? And what are their responsibilities when there is a simple request from a government to block a website? Can they refuse, and can they, or should they be asking for what is the basis and what is the legal basis for doing anything? Other than that, I'm afraid we cannot comply. Can they say something like that?
Yes, that's Facebook does that all of the time. They refuse to close down by a mere request. They have to study it, and they have to follow the advice of their lawyers if there's a basis. These platform owners they do not have to follow right away. In the case of here in the Philippines, they should demand a court order because that's the requirement of the law.
So what's the legal process here? Do the website operators appeal to the NTC, or do they go direct to the Supreme Court?
Well, they can write the appeal to the NTC if they want, but that will be useless. They must go to court right away.
Freedom of expression issue on a freedom of expression issue, or they're going to challenge the Anti-Terrorism Act?
They will challenge the order because if you look at it, the ATC never designated these websites as or the website owners as terrorist groups. It's just the NSC. So in fact, the ATC is washing its hands. They said we did not do anything. So what the website owners should do is to bring NSC to court, and also the NTC for implementing the order or the request of NSC.
Would this be an opportunity to revisit the Anti-Terrorism Act? Would it be an actionable issue?
Well, I don't think, because the Anti-Terrorism Council said we have not designated them at all. So it's difficult to bring in the Anti-Terrorism Council because they're washing their hands so off. This is a completely ultra vires, unauthorized, illegal act of the National Security Council and of the NTC.
Well, sir, conversely, Secretary Esperon was citing ATC or Anti-Terror Council resolutions designating CPP, NPA, and the NDF in justifying the request to close down these websites. I also remember that under the anti-terror law, there are sanctions against improper use of the law, especially against those who, in the end, are not found guilty. Does this apply?
Well, Esperon is using the designation of CPP, NDF, and the
Yes, sir.
Central Committee. But these are different entities
Yes, sir.
from
Yes.
the website owners. And the ATC will simply say, we never designated them. And
Yes,
in fact, one of the members of the ATC said the only consequence of designation is your bank accounts will
Is
be
the unlock.
frozen by
Yeah.
the AMLC.
To that point, sir, just to clarify, the term affiliates. And let's throw in other words that might come into play.
Supporters.
Supporters, sympathizers, connections, whatever. What does the law say about any other group that might be, let's say, in any way connected?
Well, you have to be designated, the organization itself. You cannot designate by association. They must be included in the designation, because how can these people now, what cause of action will they bring? Because the ATC is saying we never designated them.
Okay. Just one last question. If the aggrieved parties do take their time, or let's say in some scenario take no action, what does this request and / order by the National Security Council and the compliance of the NTC do by way of precedent for everybody else?
Well, first of all, I think it will be questioned. Second, if it will not be questioned, it will not set a precedent because the act is completely illegal, and an illegal act cannot set a precedent.
Okay, but doesn't the act essentially stay on in its effects? Doesn't it essentially linger until it is in fact challenged?
Well, for those who refuse to question it and they were shut down, that's their problem. They cannot operate anymore. So if they're happy with that or they can live with that, well, that's their problem. But it will not prejudice those who have not been closed down, and if they are closed down in the future, they can question.
Okay. Okay, former Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice Carpio, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming
Thank you,
salamat.
Justice.
Thank you.
That will be all for this edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to everyone, mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. I'm Roby Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm at Lingao, and we are One News.
They should.